In 1763, along the banks of the Potomac River, a woman named Emily lived a life of careful lies. She had built a new identity, married a respectable merchant, and buried her past so deep she almost believed it belonged to someone else. But when a stranger walked into her workplace, claiming to be her brother, a brother she'd watched die as a child, Emily's carefully constructed world began to crumble. What she didn't know was that this encounter would force her to make an impossible choice that would either destroy her or transform her completely. This is the story of what happens when the past refuses to stay buried.
Quick pause. Before we continue, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? If you're enjoying these stories, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode is absolutely mind-blowing.
The morning light filtered through the wooden shutters of the trading post, casting long shadows across the worn wooden counters. Emily moved through the familiar space with the practiced efficiency of someone who had performed these motions 1,000 times before. Her fingers traced along the leather-bound ledger, recording the inventory of goods that had arrived the previous evening: bolts of English cloth, iron tools, barrels of salted fish, crates of various supplies destined for the colonists scattered throughout the region, and several items she would need to verify against the shipping manifest. She was 32 years old, though her bearing suggested someone both younger and older simultaneously. Her face carried the kind of beauty that comes not from delicate features, but from strength. Sharp cheekbones, clear gray eyes that seemed to catalog everything they observed, and a mouth that rarely curved into a smile, but when it did, seemed to suggest she was remembering something distant and bittersweet. Her hands were strong, capable, with ink stains that no amount of washing could completely remove. They were the hands of a woman who worked, who created, who built things with her own effort. The trading post itself was a sturdy structure, built from thick timber and riverstone, constructed nearly 20 years prior when the settlement was just beginning to take shape. Inside, shelves lined every wall, laden with goods from the colonies and beyond. The air carried the mingled scents of leather, spice, freshly cut wood, and something indefinably old. The smell of survival and commerce intertwined. The smell of a place where fortunes were made and lives were changed. This was the nerve center of the small community that had grown up around the river crossing. A place where information, goods, and rumors flowed with equal measure. More than that, it was a place of genuine economic power. Goods that passed through this trading post determined which families prospered and which struggled to survive the harsh winters. Emily had been working here for nearly 9 years. She had arrived on a gray morning in 1754, walking barefoot along the river road, carrying nothing but the clothes on her back and a desperate determination to become someone different from who she had been. The owner at the time, a man named Joseph Kirkwood, had been preparing to close the trading post that very day, the business having fallen into disarray under the management of his nephew. When he saw Emily, thin, exhausted, but with an intensity of purpose in her eyes, something told him to take a chance. He had offered her employment on the condition that she could demonstrate basic competence with numbers and record-keeping. She had not only demonstrated competence, she had revealed a genius for organization and financial management that had transformed the entire operation within months. In those early years, Emily had spoken very little about her past. The other workers had learned quickly not to ask. There was something about her that discouraged questions, a hardness in her eyes that suggested pain lived just beneath the surface, a pain so significant that disturbing it could bring consequences. She would arrive before dawn, work systematically through the day with barely a break for food, and leave after the final customers had been served. On her rare days off, she would walk alone along the river, staring at the water with an expression that made people instinctively leave her undisturbed. But over time, that hardness had softened, not because she had forgotten what had shaped her, but because she had learned to lock it away so completely that entire days would pass when she barely thought about it at all.
She had become adept at living in the present moment, at focusing entirely on the tangible, manageable problems of commerce and record-keeping, at building a persona so substantial and real that it seemed to overshadow the ghost of who she had once been. Then, 5 years ago, Thomas Whitmore had arrived at the trading post. Thomas was a merchant from Philadelphia, a man of 47 with kind eyes and withered hands that spoke of honest work. He had come with credentials and capital, recommended by several established merchants in the city, intending to invest in the trading post's operations and eventually take over its management. When Joseph Kirkwood learned that his longtime friend Thomas was looking for an opportunity to invest, he immediately thought of the struggling business upriver. The match seemed fortuitous. Thomas had taken notice of Emily immediately. Not in a dramatic way, not with the sudden intensity of love at first sight, but with the gradual awareness of someone who recognized genuine competence when he saw it. Over months of working alongside her, watching how she handled difficult customers with a combination of firmness and respect, how she reconciled accounts with meticulous care even when the numbers didn't match, how she seemed to hold the entire operation together through sheer force of will and attention to detail, he had fallen in love with her. It had happened so gradually that he couldn't pinpoint the exact moment when affection had transformed into something deeper. When he had finally asked her to marry him, a simple question posed during an autumn evening as they worked late counting the day's receipts, with the river visible through the window and the smell of wood smoke drifting in from the chimneys of the settlement, Emily had been terrified. Not of him, but of the permanence of it. Marriage meant roots. It meant staying in one place. It meant that someone would eventually ask the questions she could never answer truthfully, or worse, that someone would eventually uncover the answers on their own. But she had said yes, because she had looked at Thomas's face, at the genuine kindness in his expression, at the respect he had shown her through years of working alongside her without ever making assumptions about her past, and she had realized that some things were worth risking her carefully constructed safety for. She had married Thomas in a small ceremony in the local church on a cold December morning. The ceremony had been attended by perhaps 30 people, workers from the trading post, customers who had become something like friends, the magistrate, and several merchants from the surrounding settlements. Emily had worn a new dress made from fabric they had received in a shipment, and she had felt simultaneously like a fraud and like someone stepping into genuine authenticity for the first time in her adult life. While she had never revealed her true past to Thomas, while she had never described the specific details of the violence that had shaped her childhood or the desperation that had driven her to run away at such a young age, she had learned to live with the weight of that secret. She had told him that her parents had died when she was young, that she had come to the colony with distant relatives, that there were painful memories she preferred not to discuss. She had presented this version of her history with such conviction, with such obvious, genuine pain accompanying her words, that he had accepted it with the grace of someone who understood that people carried their own burdens and were not always ready to set them down. So Emily had built a life. She managed the trading post alongside Thomas, who had become its owner when Joseph Kirkwood retired 3 years prior. Together, they had purchased the building from Joseph's heirs and had invested in expanding its operations. They had secured trade agreements with merchants in Philadelphia and Baltimore. They had a modest but comfortable home, a sturdy wooden house with a stone chimney, and a small garden where Emily grew vegetables and herbs. Located a short walk from the river, they had saved money, invested wisely, and accumulated enough resources that they no longer lived from paycheck to paycheck. They were respected in the community. Other merchants consulted them about business decisions. Local families sought their opinion on matters of importance. They were, by any reasonable measure, successful.
And every single day, Emily lived with the knowledge that this life was built on sand, that every moment of peace was contingent on no one discovering who she actually was, that her respectability was a fragile thing, a carefully constructed narrative that could be demolished by a single word from someone who had known her before she became Emily Whitmore.
The ledger in front of her required her full attention. A shipment had arrived damaged, and the discrepancies needed to be carefully documented. Several bolts of cloth had been ruined by water damage during transport. 3 crates of tools showed signs of rust and corrosion. The damage would need to be recorded, photographs would need to be taken if anyone came to dispute the claim, and correspondence would need to be sent to the supplier. Emily lost herself in the work, the way she always did. Numbers were honest. Numbers didn't lie or judge or carry the weight of history. Numbers simply were what they were, and she found profound comfort in that certainty. A number was always exactly what it represented. It was mid-morning when Thomas arrived. She heard his horse before she saw him, the familiar rhythm of hoofbeats on the hard-packed earth outside. Through the front window, she watched him dismount with the easy grace of a man comfortable with outdoor work. He had been to the nearby settlement that morning, checking on supplies and gathering news from the other merchants in the region. He entered the trading post, bringing the crisp autumn air with him. The calendar showed late September, 1763. The leaves were beginning to turn, and there was a particular quality to the light that suggested the approaching winter, though it was still weeks away. "The Hendersons are closing their farm," he said by way of greeting, moving to stand beside her at the counter. "William said the soil has been failing for 3 seasons. They're planning to move west, join some settlement near the mountains. Apparently there's talk of better land out there, less depleted by years of continuous farming." Emily nodded, recording this information in the mental file she maintained about the community. People came and went. That was the nature of frontier life. Families arrived with hope, built homes, worked the land, and when circumstances changed or opportunity called elsewhere, they packed their belongings and departed. Nothing was permanent, except change itself. "I've set aside their credit," she said. "They should be able to settle their accounts before they depart. I estimate they'll need supplies for the journey, provisions for perhaps 3 weeks of travel, tools for building a new homestead, seeds for spring planting. I've already instructed Jacob to prepare the standard package: dried goods, preserved vegetables from our root cellar, tools, rope, nails, and whatever else we typically include for families undertaking such journeys." Thomas smiled at her, the way he often did when she had already anticipated his thoughts before he had even fully articulated them. "What would I do without you?" he said, and there was genuine affection in his voice. It was a casual endearment, but Emily felt it like a small knife turning in her chest. She had asked herself many times what he would do if he knew the truth. The answer was always the same. He would feel betrayed. He would feel deceived. The foundation of their marriage would be revealed as something fundamentally compromised, as a relationship built on incomplete information. And while Thomas was kind, Emily was not certain his kindness extended to deception of such magnitude, the kind of deception that involved living every single day as someone other than who you actually were. She returned his smile, the one she had learned to produce in situations like this, a smile that was genuine enough, but that didn't quite reach her eyes, a smile that suggested contentment without revealing the anxiety that lived permanently beneath her surface. And she said nothing, because what could she possibly say? "We have a visitor," Thomas said, lowering his voice slightly. His tone shifted into something more careful, more deliberate. "He's been waiting since just after dawn in the back room." Emily's hand stilled over the ledger. In 9 years of working at the trading post and 5 years of marriage, she had learned to read people with remarkable accuracy. She had developed an almost supernatural ability to detect when someone was nervous, when they were hiding something, when they were struggling with information they weren't sure how to communicate. It was a skill born from necessity, from years of needing to anticipate problems before they fully emerged. In Thomas's tone, careful, deliberate, concerned, she detected something unusual, something that made the small hairs on the back of her neck stand up. something that sent a primitive signal through her nervous system warning of danger. "What does he want?" she asked, and she was proud that her voice remained steady. "He wouldn't say. He asked specifically for you, said he would only discuss his business with you directly. He's been quite insistent about it, actually, said he would wait all day if necessary." The knife in Emily's chest twisted deeper. She had been running from something her entire adult life, had been so careful, so vigilant, so determined to bury every trace of who she had been. Now, in a single moment, with Thomas mentioning a visitor who had come looking specifically for her, she understood with absolute clarity that the past did not die simply because you refused to acknowledge it. The past waited. The past was patient. The past was like the river, constant, powerful, always present, even when you tried not to think about it. And sometimes, when you had finally let yourself believe you were safe, when you had finally built something beautiful enough that you had almost convinced yourself it was real, the past walked through the door. "What is his name?" Emily asked, her voice steadier than she felt. He didn't give one, only that it was a matter of personal significance. "Emily, he seems to know you. The way he spoke about you, the questions he asked, it was clear to me that this isn't a stranger seeking business advice. There's something else here. Something personal." Emily stood, cutting him off. She placed the ledger carefully on the counter, aligned the quill beside it with meticulous precision, and smoothed her hands over her skirts. She had learned long ago that ritual was a form of control. If you controlled the small things, the placement of objects, the orderliness of your surroundings, the calm precision of your movements, you could sometimes control the larger forces that threatened to overwhelm you. It was the philosophy that had sustained her through years of uncertainty. "I'll speak with him," she said. "How long has he been waiting?" "Since just after dawn, over 6 hours now. He hasn't eaten. He declined water. He just sits in that room and waits. Emily, I'm concerned about what this means." She moved toward the back room before Thomas could say anything else. The trading post had a small private chamber where sensitive discussions took place, where ledgers were reviewed, where disputes were settled, where private business could be conducted away from the observation of customers and staff. It was a practical space, containing only a wooden table, several chairs, and a small window that looked out on the river beyond. The walls were bare wooden planks, and a single oil lamp hung from an iron hook, though in the middle of the day natural light filtered through the window. The man sitting at the table rose as she entered. He was thin, with the kind of thinness that spoke of hardship rather than nature. His clothes were worn but clean, mended in several places with careful stitches that suggested someone who cared about maintaining their appearance despite limited resources. His hair was dark, graying at the temples, and his face was weathered by sun and time in a way that spoke of years spent working outdoors or living without sufficient shelter. It was those eyes that stopped Emily's breath. She knew those eyes. She had known them nearly 30 years ago, when they had belonged to a boy not yet 10 years old, a boy who had held her hand in the darkness and whispered comfort even though comfort was impossible to give, a boy who had promised to protect her even though he was far too young to fulfill such a promise, a boy who had shared his small portions of food with her when they were both hungry, a boy who had whispered that everything would be all right even though they both knew it was a lie, a necessary lie, but a lie nonetheless.
A boy who had died, who had been killed in violence so brutal that she had forced herself to forget the specifics, retaining only the certainty of his death and the absolute knowledge that she was alone in the world. "Emily," the man said, and his voice was the voice of that boy, aged and weathered and deepened by years, but still fundamentally the same. There was a particular cadence to his speech, a specific way of pronouncing her name that transported her instantly back to childhood. "I've been looking for you for so long.
I wasn't certain I'd ever actually find you. But I knew it was you the moment I saw you through the window at this trading post.
Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Emily did not sit down. She could not have moved even if she wanted to. Her entire body had become rigid, as though she were holding back something vast and terrible that would destroy everything if she allowed it to emerge. The room seemed to tilt slightly, and for a moment she thought she might actually faint, something she had not done since childhood. "You're not real," she said. The words came out barely above a whisper, with no conviction whatsoever. "You're dead. I saw you. I remember." But she stopped, because she realized she didn't actually remember. She remembered blood and screaming and her own terror. But the specifics of William's death had been blocked from her memory as completely as though they had never actually happened. The man, the ghost, because surely he was a ghost, some manifestation conjured from the darkest corners of her memory, stepped toward her slowly, as though afraid sudden movement might startle her away. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone who understood that what he was about to do required immense delicacy. "I'm real," he said. "I've been real every day for the past 30 years. I've just been somewhere else, living a different life. But I've always been looking for you. Every year, I've tried to find some trace of you. Every settlement I've moved to, I've asked questions. Every community I've worked in, I've listened for news of someone matching your description. And I never gave up hope that somehow, somewhere, you might have survived like I did." His name was William. That much came back to her even as denial screamed through her mind like wind through a shattered window. William, her older brother, who had been 18 when everything changed. William, who had taken the beating meant for her when their father had been in one of his rages. William, whose body she believed she had seen broken and still on the floor of their father's house, whose blood she could still remember in dreams, even though she had consciously blocked out the specifics. Except he was standing in front of her, solid and real and alive. The impossibility of it was so staggering that Emily couldn't initially process it. "You ran," Emily heard herself say, her voice coming from somewhere very far away. "Father was, when he found out I had taken food, when he knew I had disobeyed him, there was blood. I thought you were dead. The doctor came and I was certain he had killed you." "I nearly did die," William said quietly. His voice carried the weight of decades of carrying that truth. He gestured to the chair across from him, an invitation rather than a command. "I need you to sit down and listen to me, because we don't have very much time, and what I have to tell you will change everything." The words jarred something loose in Emily's paralyzed state, pulled her back from the edge of complete emotional dissolution. "What you mean, we don't have much time?" she asked. Something in those words carried a threat beneath the surface. William's expression shifted into something pained and urgent, something that suggested he was carrying knowledge he never wanted to have. "The man is here," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "The man responsible for everything that happened to us. He's in the settlement now, staying at the inn near the river crossing. He arrived yesterday evening and he's been asking questions about a woman who matches your description. He's asking specifically about someone who arrived in the settlement 9 years ago, someone with no family connections, someone who came to work at a trading post." The room seemed to tilt more dramatically. Emily found herself reaching for the table, gripping its edge with such force that her knuckles turned white. "That's impossible," she said. "That was 30 years ago. Why would he possibly—" "Who? Who is asking questions?" "Thomas Carver," William said, and the name fell between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Our father. He's alive, Emily. And he's here, and he's looking for us."
The name hit her like a physical blow. Thomas Carver. The sound of it was enough to transport her instantly back to a small house in Baltimore, to rooms lit by firelight and shadow, to a man whose face she had deliberately forgotten, because remembering it meant confronting the full weight of what she had endured. Thomas Carver, Her father. The man who had made her childhood a study in terror and pain. No, Emily said, shaking her head. No, he's dead. He must be dead. He was old even then, and it's been 30 years. How could he? Because Thomas Carver, William interrupted, was only 38 when he nearly killed me. He would be 68 now, and according to what I've learned, he's still alive, though apparently not in good health, but alive, and asking for you. Emily sat down in the chair that William had indicated, not because she willed herself to do so, but because her legs simply gave out beneath her. She was not aware of the motion until she found herself seated, gripping the arms of the chair. "Tell me everything," she said. "Start from the beginning, and tell me everything. How did you survive? Where have you been? How did you find me?" William settled back into his own chair, and for the first time Emily noticed the details of his appearance more clearly. He was thin, but it was the thinness of a working man, not of someone starving. His clothes, while worn, were maintained with obvious care. His hands, when she looked at them, bore calluses that suggested years of labor. This was a man who had survived, but who had done so through constant work and effort. "I survived because I ran," William said simply. "After Father beat me, after I thought I was going to die, I somehow managed to get outside. I don't remember how. The pain was so severe that my mind has blocked most of it out. I remember the initial violence, and then I remember being in the darkness outside, and somehow I found the strength to run. I made it perhaps a quarter mile before I collapsed in a ravine near the river. I lay there bleeding for what might have been hours. I don't know. My memory of that time is fragmented and incomplete." He paused, collecting himself before continuing. "A man found me, a laborer who was heading to work at the docks. He didn't know who I was or where I came from, and I didn't tell him because I was afraid. I was afraid of Father finding me and finishing what he had started. This man, whose name I later learned was Samuel, took me to a place where migrant workers stayed. It was a terrible place, overcrowded, filthy, full of disease. But it was also a place where no one asked questions, where a beaten boy who appeared without explanation didn't raise eyebrows." William stood and walked to the window, looking out at the river that flowed past the trading post. Emily watched him, still unable to fully believe that this man was real, that he was her brother, that her childhood wasn't simply a nightmare she had finally managed to escape. "Samuel nursed me back to health. He cleaned my wounds, brought me food when he could, protected me from the worst of the other men in that place. I never learned why. I've spent decades wondering why a stranger would take such care of a child he didn't know. I think perhaps he had lost a son or a younger brother, but he never said. He was simply kind, in the way that people can be kind when they have nothing else to give." Emily found herself crying, though she didn't remember starting to cry. Tears ran down her face silently, without sobs or obvious emotion, as though some part of her body was expressing grief that her mind couldn't quite process. "I spent 3 years in that place. 3 years learning to survive in the worst circumstances imaginable. And then Samuel came to me one day and told me I needed to leave. He told me that staying in one place too long was dangerous for a boy like me, young, desperate, with no family to protect me. He gave me money he must have saved penny by penny, and he told me to get passage on a ship heading south. He told me to make a new life, to never go back to Baltimore, and never try to find our family because it would only bring me pain." He turned to face her, and his expression was one of profound sadness, mixed with something else, a kind of bitter wisdom that only comes from living through experiences that break you and then somehow require that you continue living despite being broken. "I didn't follow his advice about never trying to find our family. I spent every year of my adult life asking questions, trying to find some trace of you or mother. I worked in Philadelphia, in New York, in settlements along the frontier, and I asked people if they had ever heard of a girl named Emily.
age matching what you would have been. I described what I remembered of you. Most people had no information. But a few did. A few knew of someone who had been sold into service to a merchant's family. A few knew of someone who matching your description who had worked in various trading posts. He moved back to the table and withdrew a small piece of paper from his jacket. It was old, worn, folded and creased with age, the edges softened from having been handled many times. 3 years ago, I was working as a laborer on a merchant ship. We came into port in Philadelphia, and I saw a notice in a newspaper about Thomas Whitmore's trading post. There was mention of his wife managing the operations, Emily Whitmore. A former employee had written a letter commenting on her remarkable business acumen, her integrity, the way she had transformed the trading post's accounting systems. The description was vague, but something about it called to me. I couldn't explain why. It was like hearing an echo of something from very far away. William unfolded the piece of paper. It was a newspaper clipping, years old, announcing that Thomas Whitmore had taken over the trading post on the Potomac River. There was a small illustration showing the building and a brief mention of the trading post's efficient operations under new management. At the bottom of the clipping, in tiny print, it mentioned that Whitmore's wife had played an instrumental role in reorganizing the business's accounting systems. I took passage down the river. It took me 3 weeks to travel here, and I spent an entire week just watching from a distance. I stood outside your trading post and I saw you through the window. You were working at a counter. Very focused, very precise. You had the same way of tilting your head when you were concentrating that you had when you were a child. You were older, obviously. I knew that time had passed, but there was something unmistakably familiar about you. I knew it was you. I was certain. Emily found herself unable to speak. The reality of what William was telling her was beginning to settle into her consciousness with the weight of a stone. He had been looking for her. He had been searching for 30 years. He had found her not through accident, but through years of careful investigation and desperate hope. Why didn't you come to me then? Why wait 3 weeks? Why not simply approach me and tell me the truth? Because I needed to be certain, William said. And there was genuine remorse in his voice, along with something else that looked like fear. He walked to the window again, unable to maintain eye contact, as though the weight of what he had to say next was too difficult to look directly at someone while speaking it. And then 2 days ago, I saw him. William continued. His voice had dropped so low that Emily had to strain to hear the words. Thomas Carver. Older now, grayer, weaker somehow, but unmistakably him. I would recognize him anywhere. I would recognize him in absolute darkness, in complete silence. There are some people whose presence is burned into your memory so completely that you can never forget them. He is that person for me.
I don't know for certain what his intentions are, William said, but I believe he's here because he cannot accept that we survived. I believe he needs to know that his work is complete, that anyone who could testify against him, anyone who could tell the truth about what he did, is dead or gone beyond his reach. And if he discovers that you're alive, if he finds you here living a respectable life with a respectable husband, if he realizes that you've become someone of substance and standing in this community, I believe he will try to silence you, not because he cares about you, but because your existence is an affront to his sense of order. Your survival means he failed. Emily stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly against the wooden floor. The sound was jarring, violent, and it seemed to echo in her chest like a heartbeat that had become audible. She moved to the window, looking out at the river beyond. The Potomac flowed steadily, indifferent to human suffering or joy, to violence or peace, to betrayal or loyalty. It flowed for centuries before she was born and would continue long after she was gone. It would flow regardless of whether she survived this moment or was destroyed by it. "I've built a life here," she said quietly. "I have a husband who cares for me. I have respect and this community. I have a home and work that matters and a future that I thought was secure. I have—" She couldn't finish the sentence because she suddenly wasn't sure what she had. Was it a life built on truth? Or was it an elaborate fiction so carefully constructed that it had begun to feel real? So well constructed that she had almost convinced herself that it actually was real. "I know," William said. "I've been watching for 3 weeks. I've asked discreet questions about Thomas Whitmore and about his wife. Everyone speaks extremely well of him. They speak well of you. I've learned that you're known for your integrity in business, for your fair treatment of workers, for your charitable donations to the church and to families in need. You've become someone important here, someone valuable." The room seemed to close in around Emily. She could feel her heartbeat in her throat, pulsing with a sickening, irregular rhythm that suggested her body was in a state of panic, even though she was trying to maintain control through sheer force of will. "If he finds me," Emily said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper, "if he discovers that I'm here, what exactly do you think he wants to do? What are you telling me this for if not to prepare me for something terrible?" William was quiet for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. "I don't know exactly what he intends to do," William finally admitted. "I've been trying to understand his plan, but it's difficult. The men with him are not simple thugs who answer direct questions. They're organized. They move methodically. It's possible he wants information. Wants to know if you're likely to cause him trouble, if you remember enough to testify against him if given the opportunity." "Testify?" Emily's voice rose sharply. To what? To whom? It was 30 years ago. There are no authorities who care about what happened to us. We were poor. We were disposable. Children in his household. But you're not poor now, and you're not disposable. You're someone of substance. Your testimony would have weight if it came forward. You could expose what he is." Emily turned from the window to face her brother, this man she had believed dead, this man who had suddenly materialized from her past, carrying complications and dangers she had spent 30 years trying to escape, carrying choices that she had been actively avoiding. "I don't want to testify," she said flatly, with a firmness that almost made her believe the words. "I don't want to fight him. I don't want to confront my past. I don't want any of this. I want my life to continue as it is. I want to go home and pretend this conversation never happened. I want to live in peace." "That's not possible anymore," William said, and his voice was gentle but absolute. "Not since he's arrived. Not since he's begun asking questions. The only choices you have now are to confront him, to run, or to find some other way to neutralize the threat he represents. And none of those choices will allow you to maintain your current life exactly as it is." Emily felt something break inside her. Not dramatically, but with a kind of quiet finality, like ice cracking under weight that it was never designed to bear. She understood in that moment that William was right, that the life she had built, the identity she had carefully constructed, was no longer sufficient protection. That safety built on secrets was not actually safety at all. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, and there was pain in her voice now, raw and exposed. "Why did you come here, to the trading post, and reveal yourself to me? You could have handled this on your own. You could have found another way to deal with him. You could have simply disappeared, moved somewhere else, continued running. Why did you come to me?" William was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades of carrying loneliness and guilt. "I spent 30 years living with the weight of believing you were dead. I've carried guilt for surviving when you didn't, or so I thought. Every time something good happened in my life, I felt guilty for experiencing joy when I believed you had been denied it entirely. I've worked, I've survived, but I haven't truly lived. I've been running, just as you have been running. And I've been running from the same things. And then I discovered you were alive. You were not only alive, but thriving. You had built something beautiful and real. And I realized that in my desire to protect you from the truth about our past, I was actually protecting myself from the choice I should have made a long time ago. He stepped closer to her, and Emily could see that his eyes were wet with tears. I'm turning myself in to the authorities, he said quietly. I'm going to tell them what Thomas Carver did. I'm going to give my testimony about the violence, about the abuse, about everything. And I'm asking you to do the same. Emily stared at him in shock. You're going to... what? I've decided that living in hiding, living with the weight of that secret isn't worth the price it demands. But I can't do it alone. The authorities might not believe me, or they might dismiss my account as the words of a desperate man seeking revenge against someone who wronged him in his youth. But if you come forward, if you add your voice to mine, if you testify about what you witnessed and experienced, we have a chance of actually stopping him. We have a chance of ensuring that he never harms anyone else. Emily pulled away from him, her mind reeling. If we do, she said, her voice rising with panic, even if we somehow convince the authorities to listen to us, what do you think happens to my life then? To Thomas? He will know what I was. He will know that I lied to him. He will know that I am the daughter of a violent man, that I come from nothing, that I clawed my way up from the gutter and reinvented myself completely. Do you honestly believe he will forgive that? Do you believe our marriage will survive such a revelation? I don't know, William admitted. But I believe the truth. The actual, honest truth about who you are is worth the risk. I believe you're stronger than you know. And I believe the man who married you cares for you enough to accept the truth.
Emily did not give William an answer. Instead, she excused herself, saying she needed to gather her thoughts, that the shock of his revelation required time to process. She left him in the small room with instructions that Thomas was to ensure he was fed and given a place to rest for the night. She could see the conflict in Thomas's face as she passed. He clearly wanted to ask what the mysterious visitor's business had been, but Emily's expression must have warned him against it. She had perfected over the years the art of closing herself off, of making her emotional boundaries so clear that people understood instinctively not to cross them. She spent the remainder of the day in a state of careful normalcy that required every ounce of strength she possessed. She attended to customers with practiced courtesy, recorded transactions with meticulous accuracy, organized inventory with mechanical precision. She spoke to Thomas about the day's business in measured tones when he checked on her periodically throughout the afternoon and asked about his meeting with the Henderson family with an interest that felt genuine, even though she had to manufacture it entirely. She performed her life as though nothing fundamental had shifted, even as everything she had carefully constructed trembled on the edge of complete collapse. When evening came, she and Thomas returned to their home in the gathering darkness. The house was quiet, warm, lit by the soft glow of the fire she had asked Jacob to build before she left the trading post. It was beautiful in its simplicity, clean, orderly, everything in its place. The shelves held books, their leather spines catching the firelight. The furniture was good quality, well made, chosen carefully over the years. It was the house of a woman who had achieved stability and respect. It was the house of a woman who had earned the right to peace. It was also, Emily now understood, the house of a woman living a lie. Thomas seemed to sense her turbulent emotional state with the sensitivity that had drawn her to him initially. He made no attempt at forced conversation, but merely sat beside her near the fire, his presence a quiet reassurance.
He poured them both cups of cider and let the evening settle around them like a blanket, the way autumn evenings do when the day's heat has finally dissipated and the night brings relief. The sound of the river was faintly audible from the house, a constant background murmur that Emily had learned to find soothing. It was perhaps an hour after they returned home that Thomas finally asked the question Emily had been dreading with an intensity that had grown throughout the evening. Who was he? Thomas's voice was gentle, but it carried an edge of concern that suggested he had been wrestling with the question for hours. The man who came to the trading post. You've been quiet since you spoke with him, and Emily, you've never been particularly talkative, even on normal days, but this is different. This is something that has shaken you to your core. I can see it in the way you move. I can see it in the way you're holding yourself. Emily, I love you. Whatever this is, whatever this person represents to you, I want to help, but I can't help if you won't talk to me. His kindness made it worse. It made her want to run, to flee into the night, to escape into the forest and lose herself in the darkness, to somehow undo the past 30 years and return to being someone who had no connections, no one who cared about her survival, no one to lose. But Emily had spent 30 years learning not to run from her problems. She had spent 30 years building walls instead of bridges, but she had also learned that walls, while they protected you, also imprisoned you. His name is William, she said, and her voice broke on the name. He is my brother, or rather he claims to be my brother. I'd believed him dead. I had been absolutely certain that he died when I was a child, in circumstances that I have never spoken about. I felt Thomas turn to look at me, but I kept my gaze fixed on the fire, unable to meet his eyes while speaking truths I had kept buried for so long. I see, Thomas said carefully. That would certainly be shocking. Where has he been all these years? Living, surviving, like all of us, doing what was necessary to continue existing in a world that does not particularly care about our survival. 40 years is a long time to carry the weight of loss. Thomas reached for her hand. His touch was warm, real, grounding. You've never spoken about your family, Emily. I've accepted that you've had reasons for silence, but perhaps it's time to tell me the truth about your past. I won't judge you. Nothing you tell me will change how I feel about you. Her hands were shaking. She clasped them tightly in her lap, but Thomas's hand held firm, refusing to be shaken away. She drew upon every reservoir of control she possessed, but she also recognized that the control she had been maintaining for 30 years had exhausted her beyond measure. My father was a violent man, she heard herself say. The words came out in a monotone, as though they were being spoken by someone else, someone distant and disconnected from her own body. He drank, and when he drank, he became cruel. He hurt people. He hurt us. My mother left when I was very young. I don't even remember her properly. I have only vague impressions. The smell of her perfume, the sound of her voice, the feeling of her hands comforting me. But these memories may not be real. They may have been constructed by my imagination to fill the void left by her absence. She paused, unable to continue, but Thomas's squeeze of her hand encouraged her forward. He hurt William, Emily continued, the words tumbling out now with a momentum of their own. One day when I had done something to anger him, when I had disobeyed him in some small way that I have deliberately forgotten, he flew into a rage. He beat William because William tried to protect me. I thought he died. I was so young and I was so certain he died. The violence was so terrible that I forced myself to forget most of the details, retaining only the certainty of his death and the absolute knowledge that I was alone in the world. The fire crackled and shifted, throwing new shadows across the room. Everything fell apart after that, Emily said. I was taken in by people, but it was clear I was a burden. I was sold to work as a servant for a merchant's family. I worked for them for years, Thomas. I was beaten if I was too slow, if I was clumsy, if I somehow failed to meet their expectations. I learned to keep my head down, to do my work, to be invisible. I learned that survival was possible if you made yourself small enough, quiet enough, unobtrusive enough. And then one day, when I was 17, I decided I was done. I decided I wasn't going to live like that anymore. So I left. I walked away from everything and everyone, and I came here. I became someone different. I built a life. The words had spilled out of me like blood from a wound, and now that the initial dam had broken, it was impossible to stop the flow. Everything you know about me is a version of the truth. My parents are dead, spiritually, if not physically. I have no family, or at least I had none until today. I have no past to speak of that doesn't involve pain and poverty and degradation. And so I created a woman who is capable of surviving in the world. I created Emily Whitmore, and I made her real through sheer force of will and determination. I made her real through years of careful choices and meticulous attention to detail. And now that man, William, he wants me to go back. He wants me to resurrect all of that pain and speak about it publicly. He wants me to confront the man responsible for ruining my childhood, and he wants me to be willing to destroy my life here in order to do it.
Thomas was quiet for a long moment. His hand still held hers, but his grip had loosened slightly, as though he needed to adjust to the weight of what she had just revealed. When he spoke, his voice was very carefully controlled, measured and thoughtful. The voice of a man who understood that what he said in the next few moments would have profound consequences. "The man who is staying at the trading post," he said. "Is he truly your brother?" "I believe he is," Emily said. "I knew him as a child. I know the truth of what he's telling me, even though I've spent 30 years trying not to believe it. He survived something I thought he hadn't survived. And now he's come to tell me that the man responsible for his injury, for all of our suffering, is here, in this settlement, now." Thomas withdrew his hand from hers and stood. He moved away from the fire, walking to the window that looked out onto the darkness beyond. The night outside was complete, the river invisible but audible, a constant, steady presence beyond the wall of the house, flowing regardless of what happened inside these walls. "What does he want you to do?" Thomas asked. "Testify against him," Emily said simply, her voice hollow. "Stand in front of authorities and tell them about my childhood. Tell them about my father's violence. Tell them about the specific acts of cruelty and abuse that I have deliberately attempted to forget. Essentially, unmask myself completely. Reveal that I am not actually the woman you married, but rather a woman you married based on false pretenses and deliberate omissions." Thomas withdrew his hand and moved away. He stood in silence for so long that Emily began to wonder if he was ever going to speak again, if he was wrestling with the decision to leave her, to end their marriage rather than face the complications that would come with supporting her through this. Finally, he turned back to face her. "I'm not angry," he said, and he spoke these words with such evident sincerity that Emily almost broke down entirely. "I want you to know that clearly. I'm not angry at you, Emily. If I'm angry at the circumstances that forced you to make such choices. I'm angry at a world that would hurt a child so thoroughly that she would feel compelled to completely erase her identity in order to survive. I'm angry at the man who caused this, whoever he is. But I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. When you married me, did you love me? Or was I simply a means to an end, a way to consolidate your new identity and make it permanent?" The question caught Emily off guard. She had prepared herself for accusations, for recriminations, for the expression of betrayal she had felt certain would come. But this question, asked with such genuine vulnerability, undid something in her that she had thought was indestructible. Tears came to her eyes, tears that she had not shed in years, tears that she had thought herself incapable of producing. They came suddenly and completely, breaking through every defense she had constructed. "Yes,
she said. I did. I do. You were kind to me when I didn't believe kindness was possible. You gave me stability when I had only ever known chaos. You treated me with respect when I had only ever known contempt. You saw me as a capable person, as someone worthy of trust and responsibility. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw value. You gave me that. But you didn't trust me, Thomas said. It wasn't a question, and his voice carried understanding rather than accusation. No, Emily admitted, her tears flowing freely now. I didn't trust that my past wouldn't disgust you. I didn't trust that knowing where I came from wouldn't somehow taint what we had built. I didn't trust that you would be able to see me, really see me, if you knew the complete truth about who I was. I was wrong to not trust you, but I was also afraid. For 30 years, I have been afraid. Fear has been the foundation of everything I have done, every choice I have made. Thomas moved back to her, kneeling in front of her so that he could look directly into her face. He reached up and wiped the tears from her cheeks with careful, gentle fingers. Then here is what we are going to do, he said. Tomorrow, you are going to talk to your brother again, and you are going to ask him for more specific information about this man, about Thomas Carver. You are going to understand exactly what he has done, exactly what he represents, and exactly what testifying against him would entail. You are going to learn everything you need to know to make an informed decision. And then you and I are going to sit down together and we are going to make a decision about the future. Because, Emily, I want you to know something, and I want you to believe it with absolute certainty. Whatever you decide, I will stand with you. Even if you decide that your life here is more important than pursuing justice. Even if you decide that you need to run again. Even if you decide that you want to stay and fight. I will be beside you. I will support you. I will not leave you. Emily found herself unable to speak. The kindness in his words was almost unbearable. She had spent her entire adult life preparing for abandonment, for rejection, for the moment when the people around her would realize she wasn't worth the effort of caring for. It had never occurred to her that the response to her confession might be unconditional support. Why? She asked, her voice breaking completely. Why would you do that? Why would you choose to stand by me knowing what I've hidden from you, knowing what I am? Because, Thomas said, the woman I married may have been partially constructed, but she was not a lie. Your strength is real. Your competence is real. Your integrity in business, your care for the people who work for you, your attention to detail, and your commitment to doing things correctly, these are all real. And yes, you hid a difficult past for me, but you did so not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. I can forgive that. I can understand that. And I can choose to support you moving forward, not because I have to, but because I choose to. Because I love you. He reached for her hand again, and this time, when he took it, Emily did not pull away.
The next morning, Emily met with William again. This time, Thomas sat with her in the small room at the trading post. William's initial reaction to Thomas's presence was one of protective suspicion. He saw in Thomas's arrival a threat, a test to his credibility, an interruption in his carefully planned revelation. But he seemed to relax when Emily introduced them and explained that her husband knew the full truth of her past and was choosing to stand with her regardless. I need you to tell us everything, Emily said, her voice steady and controlled once more. The crying had ended during the night, replaced by a kind of calm acceptance. She had made peace with the fact that their old life was over, and this clarity gave her strength. I need to understand who this man is, what exactly he did, and what you believe can be accomplished by me coming forward and testifying against him. William spent the next several hours laying out the complete history of Thomas Carver. He was, it turned out, a man of some means. Not wealthy by the standards of the colonial elite, but affluent enough that he had social standing in Baltimore. He conducted business in a number of commercial ventures, and he had acquired a reputation for ruthlessness in his dealings. The violence that had devastated William and Emily's childhood had been one incident among many. A man prone to brutality with his family, with his workers, with anyone he perceived as beneath him or resistant to his will. The constable at the time chose not to investigate too deeply, William explained. Our mother had already disappeared. Father was known to be a violent man, but as long as his violence was confined to his own household, as long as it wasn't bleeding into the broader community in an obvious way, there was limited motivation to intervene. What happened to us didn't matter because we didn't matter. We were poor. We were disposable. The system was not built to protect people like us. But something changed, Emily said, sensing there was more to the story. He's come looking for us now, 30 years later. Something must have changed his circumstances or his perception of risk. William nodded slowly. He's dying, he said quietly. I've learned this from conversations with some of his employees, men who came to the settlement with him. He has perhaps a year, maybe less. An ailment of the lungs, and also something else that the physicians won't name, but that is clearly degrading his health rapidly. He has been wealthy enough to afford the finest physicians, but their verdicts have all been the same. He's dying, and he knows it. And that knowledge is what has driven him to come here. So he's coming to settle accounts, Thomas said, understanding the implication immediately. He's trying to ensure that anyone who might serve as a witness to his crimes is silenced before he dies. More or less, William confirmed. But his knowledge is incomplete. He knows there was a daughter who survived childhood, but his precise recollection is fuzzy, and he's not certain about the specifics. He's checking to see if anyone matching our descriptions has resurfaced in the colonies. If he finds us, I believe he intends to kill us, or at least to threaten us into silence. Emily felt the words settle over her like a heavy cloth, suffocating and inescapable. A man she had not seen since childhood had come to murder her. The simplicity of it was almost absurd in its horror. There's something else, William continued. Something I should have told you immediately, but I was afraid. I was afraid that if you knew the complete truth, you would reject me just as I was certain you would want to reject this entire situation. He stood and walked to the small window. His shoulders were tense, his jaw clenched. I've been in contact with him, William said quietly. Before I came here, before I revealed myself to you, I went to the inn where he's staying. I introduced myself as a businessman interested in acquiring some of his commercial properties. I wanted to see if he would recognize me. I wanted to understand what was driving him. I wanted to look into the eyes of the man who destroyed my childhood and see if I could survive that encounter. Emily's blood ran cold. You did what? I met with him, William repeated. And Emily, he recognized me. Not immediately, but after we talked for a while, there was a moment where his face changed, where something clicked into place. He knows I'm alive. He knows I'm here. He knows that I survived the beating he gave me all those years ago. Thomas stood abruptly, his calm demeanor finally breaking. Then you've led him directly to us. William, by coming here, by making your presence known, you've essentially painted a target on Emily's back. You've given him confirmation that she might be here. I know, William said, turning to face them both, and Emily could see the anguish in his expression. I know exactly what I've done, and I've been wrestling with the morality of it for 2 days. The truth is, I needed him to know I was alive. I needed him to understand that his violence all those years ago didn't successfully eliminate me. And I needed to see his reaction. Needed to confirm that the memories I carry are accurate, that the man I've been running from in my mind for 30 years is real, and not simply a product of trauma and imagination. But now what? Emily demanded, standing up as well. Now that he knows you're alive, now that we know we're here, what exactly is your plan? How does this lead to anything other than disaster? Now we force the confrontation. We don't run. We don't hide.
We go directly to the colonial magistrate and we tell him everything. We tell him what Thomas Carver is, what he's done, what he intends to do. We provide our testimony before he has time to act, before he can ensure our silence through violence. And if the magistrate doesn't believe us, Emily asked, if he decides that the word of a dying man is more credible than the word of a former street child and a merchant's wife, if he decides that violence in a poor household 30 years ago doesn't worth investigating, then at least we will have spoken the truth, Williams said, and we will have done so publicly, in a way that cannot be silenced by his death. We will have ensured that when this man is gone, when he no longer exists to defend himself or to silence his accusers, the truth will remain. It will be recorded. It will be part of the historical record. And that matters. That means something. Emily wanted to scream. She wanted to overturn the table, to drive William out of this room and out of her life, to somehow undo the last 2 days and return to the world as it had been before his arrival. But she couldn't do any of those things because beneath her fury and her fear, she recognized the terrible truth in what he was saying. She had spent 30 years running. She had built a beautiful life, a respectable life, a life of accomplishment and stability, but it was all built on the foundation of avoidance. She had never confronted the demons of her past because she had never believed she possessed the strength to do so. And now, with William's arrival, she was being forced to confront a choice she had been denying herself for 3 decades. Did she want to continue living in fear, or did she want to finally be free?
If we do this, Emily said slowly, her voice dropping but becoming stronger, if we come forward and testify against him, we have to be prepared for the possibility that he will use his remaining resources to destroy us. He might succeed in turning the magistrate against us. He might have men willing to kill us for enough money. Or he might simply die before the matter is fully resolved, and we'll be left with nothing. Our privacy violated, our secrets exposed, and no justice to show for it. Yes, William said, those are all real possibilities. And you're willing to accept those possibilities? Emily asked. You're willing to sacrifice everything you've built, everything I've built, on the possibility of achieving justice for crimes committed 30 years ago against people who were powerless and disposable? I'm not asking you to do anything, William said, and his voice was gentle now, almost sad. I'm here. Thomas Carver knows I'm here. He will come for me, and I will face him or I will run. But I wanted to give you the choice. I wanted to let you know the truth, so that you could decide for yourself what you wanted to do. If you choose to distance yourself from me, if you choose to remain silent, I won't judge you for it. I understand the cost of speaking. I understand what it requires. Thomas moved toward Emily. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of support and solidarity. What do you want to do? He asked quietly. Not what you think you should do, and not what you feel obligated to do, but what do you actually want? Emily closed her eyes. In that moment of darkness, she felt the weight of 30 years pressing down upon her. She felt every lie she had ever told, every false smile she had manufactured, every time she had deflected a question or changed the subject or steered a conversation away from dangerous territory. She felt the exhaustion of maintaining a fiction so complete that it had almost become real. And she felt something else. She felt the child she had been, traumatized, afraid, desperate to survive. She felt the young woman she had become, running, building walls, learning to trust no one. And she felt the woman she was now, capable, respected, loved. I want to stop being afraid, she said slowly, opening her eyes and looking directly at William. I want to stop living in a cage I built myself. I want to stop letting what happened to me 30 years ago continue to define my present. I want to know what it feels like to be completely, utterly honest about who I am. Thomas squeezed her shoulder. Then we go to the magistrate, together, all of us. The magistrate's name was Harrow. He was a stern man, pragmatic, the kind of authority figure who had learned not to be easily shocked by human depravity. Emily, William, and Thomas went to his office the following morning, and they told their story. William told his story of survival and decades of searching. Emily told hers, the violence she had witnessed, the fear she had lived with, the desperate escape she had managed at such a young age. Thomas provided context regarding the inquiries that had been made about Emily in the settlement, information he had gathered from merchants who had been approached by the men traveling with Thomas Carver. When they finished, the magistrate sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. He looked at each of them in turn, his expression grave and thoughtful. "What you're describing is certainly troubling. However, I must be honest with you. Prosecuting crimes that occurred 30 years ago in a household of people with no social standing against a man who has friends in positions of influence, it's not a straightforward matter. The courts are not built to address such wrongs. The system, I'm ashamed to say, often fails people like you." Emily felt her heart sink. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing it confirmed was nevertheless devastating. "However," the magistrate continued, "the inquiries being made about individuals matching your descriptions, combined with the testimony of your brother regarding his meeting with Thomas Carver and Carver's apparent recognition of him, does suggest ongoing criminal intent. I can speak with him directly. I can inform him that his activities are being observed and documented. I can make it clear that any violence perpetrated against you will result in severe consequences for him, whatever his station." Emily felt her heart sink. She had known this was a possibility, but hearing it confirmed was nevertheless devastating. "However," the magistrate continued, "I have learned in my years holding this position that there are forms of accountability that exist beyond the legal system. Thomas Carver has business interests throughout the colonies. Word of what he is, word of his crimes, word of his search to silence witnesses, these things have a way of traveling. Men such as him depend on reputation. Depending on what information becomes public, that reputation may be all he has left to lose." 2 days later, Emily received word that Thomas Carver had left the settlement. He had departed hastily, taking his men with him. He had not attempted to contact Emily or William, had not attempted any violence. He had simply left, apparently convinced that whatever threat Emily and William represented was now greater than any benefit he might derive from eliminating them. 1 week later, Margaret arrived. She came by coach, an older woman with gray in her hair and lines of suffering etched into her face from decades of carrying loss. But her eyes were the same eyes Emily remembered from early childhood, kind, worried, gentle, eyes that had looked at her with love before everything fell apart. When Margaret saw her daughter for the first time in 30 years, she wept, and Emily, standing in the doorway of the home she and Thomas had built, wept as well. That evening the house filled with people, Margaret, William, Thomas, and Emily. For the first time in her adult life, Emily was surrounded by family. They sat together as darkness fell outside, and Margaret told her story, how she had escaped her father's abuse, how she had managed to build a new life in Philadelphia, how she had worked as a housekeeper for a physician's family, how she had other children, how she had never stopped searching for her lost children, and learning that they were alive was the greatest gift she could have received. "I'm sorry," Margaret said, holding her daughter's hand tightly. "I'm sorry I had to leave you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. You didn't have a choice, just as I didn't, just as William didn't. We all did what we had to do to survive, and we all survived. That's what matters." Over the following weeks, as autumn turned toward winter, a new equilibrium was established. Margaret decided to remain in the settlement, finding work helping other women with household management and childcare. William stayed as well, working alongside Thomas in the trading post, the two men developing a genuine friendship built on their shared love for Emily and their mutual respect for each other's character. And Emily, found herself experiencing something she had never thought possible: the simple, ordinary joy of family. Not family as an abstraction or as a source of trauma, but family as something that could be honest, supportive, and genuinely loving. Family not bound by obligation, but chosen through courage. One afternoon, perhaps 3 months after William had first walked into the trading post, Emily found herself alone at work, tallying accounts as she always did. But as she reviewed the numbers, she realized something profound had shifted within her. She was no longer anxious about her past. She was no longer afraid that someone would discover the truth about her childhood, because the truth was no longer a secret. She had spoken it aloud. She had testified to it. She had woven it into the fabric of her community's knowledge of who she was.
More than that, they saw her as real, as whole, as authentically human. Children who had heard fragments of her story looked at her with a new admiration. Women who had endured their own hardships approached her with a sense of connection. Men in the community acknowledged her with a respect that seemed deeper than it had been before. Emily closed the ledger and looked toward the window. The Potomac River flowed past, carrying the seasons forward, carrying life toward whatever came next. She thought about the choice she had made, the choice to face her past rather than hide from it, to reveal her truth rather than maintain the fiction, to accept her family's love rather than deny its possibility. She thought about how often in life we believe we must choose between security and authenticity, between safety and truth, between the life we've built and the person we truly are. But as she sat in the trading post that had been her refuge and her prison, her achievement and her limitation, Emily understood that this was a false choice. The truth was that we couldn't actually build a meaningful life on anything but authenticity. Security built on lies was not actually secure. It was a fragile thing, constantly threatened by the possibility of exposure, constantly depleting the emotional resources required to maintain it. By choosing to reveal the truth about herself, by choosing to stop running from her past and instead to acknowledge and integrate it, Emily's had actually gained something far more valuable than the false security of her previous life. She had gained genuine peace. She had gained authentic connection. She had gained the knowledge that she was loved not for the person she had pretended to be, but for the person she actually was. Damaged, resilient, strong and beautifully, courageously human. This is what it truly means to change one's life. It's not about escaping who you were or denying where you came from. It's not about constructing an entirely new identity and abandoning the old one. It's about having the courage to acknowledge your past, to integrate it into your present, and to move forward not in spite of your struggles, but because of them. It's about understanding that the most ordinary person, faced with a choice between truth and lies, between fear and courage, can accomplish something extraordinary simply by choosing to be honest. Emily Whitmore had survived her childhood. She had survived the journey from that survival to this moment. And in choosing to finally acknowledge that journey, in choosing to speak the truth about her past, she had transformed not just her own life, but the lives of everyone around her. She had shown them what was possible when someone refused to be diminished by their circumstances, when someone chose authenticity over protection, when someone decided that living fully was worth the risk of being fully seen. The river flowed on, indifferent and eternal. But Emily, sitting among her ledgers and her accounts and her life, had finally learned to flow with it, no longer resisting, no longer running, simply moving forward with the knowledge that she was exactly where she needed to be, and that the journey to get here, however painful, however difficult, however terrifying, had made her into someone capable, someone worth knowing, someone capable of genuine love and deserving of it in return. Thomas Carver died 3 months later. Word came through merchants traveling from Baltimore that he had succumbed to his illness. He never returned to the settlement. He never made another attempt to find Emily or William. Whether he had genuinely accepted defeat or simply lacked the strength to continue his pursuit remained unclear, but the outcome was the same. The threat had been eliminated not through confrontation, but through the simple acknowledgement of it, through the refusal to hide from it any longer. When Emily heard the news, she felt something shift inside her. She expected to feel relief, or perhaps triumph. Instead, she felt something closer to pity. Thomas Carver had spent his final months consumed by rage and fear, driven by the desperate need to eliminate people who had already moved beyond his reach years ago. He had allowed his past actions to poison his present until his very dying breath. And in that moment of understanding, Emily recognized the profound difference between his path and hers. She had chosen differently. She had chosen to face what had broken her, to integrate it, to transform it into something that gave her strength rather than took it from her. And that choice had led her to a place of genuine peace. Not the brittle, defensive peace of someone constantly vigilant against discovery, but the quiet, sustaining peace of someone living authentically. Margaret settled fully into the community, becoming known as a woman of great wisdom regarding the raising of children and the healing of domestic wounds. She worked with women who found themselves in difficult situations, offering both practical assistance and emotional support. She did not speak of her own past unless asked, but when she did, she spoke with a kind of authority that only comes from genuine lived experience. The community respected her, valued her, and created a place for her within its fabric. William proved to be an excellent businessman, working alongside Thomas in expanding the trading post's operations. He was methodical, careful with numbers, and had a gift for understanding what different customers needed even before they themselves fully understood it. More than that, he brought a genuine warmth to his interactions with people, a warmth born from the understanding that every person he met had survived something. He never pried into other people's pasts, but he listened when people chose to share, and he offered help without judgment. Thomas watched both of them with an expression of quiet satisfaction. He had married a woman constructed from determination and will. But he had discovered that the real Emily, the one who had lived through pain, who had fought for her survival, who had chosen to speak truth despite the cost, was far more remarkable than any constructed version could ever be. Their marriage deepened as the months passed, moving from the relatively surface compatibility they had shared before to something far richer and more authentic. In the winter evenings, the four of them would sit together in the house Emily and Thomas owned, Margaret, William, Thomas, and Emily, and they would share stories. Margaret would speak of her life in Philadelphia, of the family she had built there, of the quiet ways she had searched for her lost children throughout the years. William would speak of the places he had traveled, the people he had met, the long journey from survival to something that approached wholeness. Thomas would speak of business and commerce, yes, but also of how the trading post had become something far greater than a mere economic enterprise. It had become a center of community, a place where people from all walks of life came together. And Emily would listen, occasionally adding to the narrative, but mostly just absorbing the reality of her life. This was not the life she had imagined when she walked barefoot along the river road at 17, desperate and alone. It was not the life she had constructed with such meticulous care, designed to be perfect and safe and emotionally manageable. It was something far messier and more complicated and infinitely more real. It was a life lived in connection rather than isolation, in truth rather than carefully constructed fiction, in genuine relationship rather than performed civility. As the winter deepened and snow began to fall, Emily found herself thinking about the river. The Potomac froze at the edges during the coldest months, but the center continued to flow, moving beneath the ice like truth beneath the surface of carefully maintained appearances. In spring, the ice would break and melt, and the river would continue its eternal journey toward the sea. The cycle would repeat itself, eternal and indifferent. But the people living along the river's banks, they changed. They grew. They learned. They transformed themselves through the choices they made and the courage they found within themselves. Emily was no longer the woman running from her past. She was a woman who had faced it, claimed it, integrated it, and used it to become someone capable of genuine contribution to her community. This was the real transformation. Not the initial escape from Baltimore, not the construction of a new identity and abandoning the old one. The real transformation was the choice to stop running, to stop hiding, stop being afraid of who she had been, and to finally understand that her past did not define her, unless she allowed it to. She had survived, and now she was living. The trading post continued to prosper. Word spread throughout the colonies about the honest dealings, fair prices, and exceptional service available at Thomas Whitmore's establishment on the Potomac River. People traveled from greater distances to conduct business there not only because the goods were of quality, but because there was something about the place and the people who worked there that made them feel valued and respected. Emily continued to manage the accounts with meticulous precision. But now, when young women came to work at the trading post, women who had fled difficult situations, who carried shadows in their eyes that suggested hardship, Emily saw herself in them, and she made sure they knew they were valued, that their labor was recognized, that they had a future beyond the difficult circumstances that had brought them to seek employment.
In doing so, she became a kind of beacon for people facing similar struggles. They would come to her with their problems, their fears, their desperate situations, and she would listen with complete attention. And in listening, in validating their experiences, in helping them understand that survival was possible, she paid forward the grace that Thomas Whitmore had shown her when she arrived desperate and alone. 1 year after William had first arrived at the trading post, Emily stood alone by the river on a spring morning. The ice had broken weeks before, and the river now flowed freely, carrying the debris of winter downstream. She looked at the water and thought about the person she had been, the person she had tried to become, and the person she actually was. The river had never changed its essential nature. It flowed because that was what rivers did. It provided sustenance and transportation and beauty and power. It didn't apologize for being itself. It didn't hide or pretend or construct elaborate fictions to make itself more acceptable to the world. Emily had learned, finally, to be like the river, to flow forward from where she had been toward where she was going, to nourish the life around her, to be powerful in her authenticity, to accept that pain was part of her history without allowing it to poison her present. She reached down and picked up a small stone from the bank. It was smooth, polished by years of water and movement. Once, it had been sharp and rough, but time and the river's constant motion had transformed it into something different, not less real, not weakened by the transformation, but changed into something new while retaining its essential nature. Emily understood that she was like that stone. Her childhood pain had shaped her, but it had not defined her. The river of her life, the moving forward, the constant motion, the flow towards something beyond herself, had transformed that pain into wisdom, that trauma into resilience, that fear into courage. She released the stone and watched it sink beneath the surface of the water. The river continued to flow as it always had, indifferent to the stone, to Emily, to any human concern. But Emily was no longer afraid of that indifference. She had learned that meaning came not from external circumstances, but from the choices she made, the connections she formed, the truth she spoke, and the love she chose to accept and offer. When she returned to the trading post that morning, Thomas was waiting for her with warm cider and bread. William was already working, carefully reconciling the accounts for the previous day. Margaret was in the back room, helping a woman who had come seeking work and a place to escape to, giving her the same opportunity Emily had been given nearly 20 years earlier. And Emily understood that this was what it meant to truly transform your life. Not to erase your past or deny it or run from it, but to take what had broken you and use it to help others, to speak your truth, and thereby give others permission to speak theirs, to choose authenticity and thereby create a community where authenticity could flourish. The day progressed as days did, with customers coming and going, with goods being exchanged, with the simple commerce of human life continuing its eternal rhythm. But beneath it all, Emily was aware of something she had never felt before. She was aware of her own presence. She was aware of being truly, completely herself, not performing, not hiding, not constructing, but simply being. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.
This is the story of Emily, a woman who learned that the past, while it cannot be changed, need not be allowed to control the future. That running from the truth is more exhausting than facing it. That the greatest strength is not in maintaining perfect appearances, but in having the courage to be seen, completely and authentically, by the people who matter. Her journey was not unique. People throughout the colonies and throughout history have made similar choices: to speak their truth despite the cost, to face their past despite the fear, to accept connection despite the vulnerability it requires. Some of them are remembered, most are not. But all of them, all of the ordinary people who choose authenticity over safety, truth over protection, genuine connection over isolation, all of them change their communities in quiet ways that ripple outward through generations. Emily Whitmore was such a person. She was not famous. No history books recorded her story. But in the trading post on the Potomac, in the community that grew up around it, in the lives of the people she helped and mentored and encouraged, her choice to be authentic had profound effects. Children grew up seeing a woman who had survived difficulty and emerged stronger. Young women seeking to escape difficult situations found a refuge and a model of what was possible. Men learned that strength could exist alongside vulnerability, that honesty was more valuable than reputation, that love required risk. The river flowed on as rivers always do, but the people living along its banks had changed. And that change, though it seems small in the vast sweep of history, was actually everything. It was the accumulation of individual choices to live authentically, to speak truth, to accept love and connection. It was the ordinary miracle of people choosing to be fully human, fully seen, fully present. Emily Whitmore died in her sleep many years later, surrounded by the family she had claimed and been claimed by, in a home filled with the warmth of genuine love and authentic connection. She was remembered not for great deeds or public accomplishment, though those came as natural consequences of her integrity. She was remembered for who she was, a woman who had learned to stop running, to stop hiding, to stop being afraid. A woman who had chosen truth over safety, and in doing so had found something far more valuable than safety could ever offer. She had found peace.
Up next, 2 more incredible stories are waiting for you right on your screen. If you enjoyed this one, you won't want to miss these. Just click to watch and don't forget to subscribe.